Okay, we are on record now.
Okay,
I don't know what you're doing.
I'm trying to share the screen.
Why don't you welcome
Okay, I want to welcome everybody to tonight's webinar. I'm Maggie Coulter with Save Sacramento Neighborhoods and also the Elmhurst Neighborhood Association. And we are co-hosting tonight's forum with the East Sacramento Preservation Association. And I want to thank Will Green with East Sacramento Preservation for his support. I will be doing a brief overview of some provisions of the general plan and some potential impacts. And then we will be hearing from Chris Jones, who is I'll introduce before he speaks. And then we will be hearing from Emily Gable-Luddy and Isaiah Madison with Livable California. And hopefully, where's the screen now? I'm trying to share the screen here. We're having some technical, okay.
It's okay.
I want to just say we welcome questions and ask that you put them in the chat. And you can do little comments, but if we can kind of keep the chat for questions, that'll help us in trying to find those when we're ready to take questions. We also are recording tonight's presentation. And it will be available afterwards on YouTube. If you're having any technical difficulties, you can direct questions to Patricia Doherty, who's managing the Zoom tonight. So let me just do a kind of brief overview. The 2040 general plan and what it means for the future of Sacramento's neighborhoods. So, see some people still coming in. So basically, and we did invite the city planners to come tonight, but they weren't able to do that. So I'm going to kind of do their job, but also combine that with looking at the plan with a bit more critical eye. So the status right now, so people know, was the city council has directed city planners to continue working on the general plan after the January hearing, in which they agreed on certain principles. The plan itself is scheduled to take effect next year. We're going to focus on just some provisions of the plan because it does cover quite a bit. One of the things we're focusing on tonight is the upzoning. So this draft general plan would allow up to 6 units on what is now R1 single family lots. So all property in Sacramento that's zoned R1 would, instead of currently they can have corner duplexes, they would be able to have up to 6 residential units. And we get to the 6 because the city is saying they're going to allow up to 4 plexes, and state law says you get 2 additional units, 2 accessory dwelling units or in-law units on top of whatever the zoning is. So you take the 4 plexes and you add the 2 ADUs and you get 6 units. The general plan would do a few other things. For example, it would eliminate all on-site parking requirements, and that's commercial, office, and residential. So in residential, that would mean that there would not have to be any on-site parking provided, so that any residents, if there wasn't parking provided, it's not prohibited, but it's not required. So that means that residents would park on the street if parking were not provided. Another provision, and these, the 2 that I've mentioned already, the upzoning and the parking, are actually controversial, as is the 3rd provision I'm going to mention, which is that the city wants to go to all electrification of all buildings, eliminating gas, heating, cooling, appliances, phasing that in over time, but eventually having all buildings be electric. We're not really going to be able to get into that too much, but there are a number of issues that are associated with that also. So I'm going to talk mostly about the upzoning. So one of the changes is currently the city restricts the building footprint, how much space it can take up on a lot. And it's 40% or up to a maximum of 2,500 square feet. What the new proposal is to do, the general plan proposal, is they have something called floor area ratios. And if people have heard the city presentation, you've heard that. And what that means is that if you have a 5,000 square foot lot in the R1, you can have a building that is 5,000 square feet. If you have a 6,000 square foot lot, you can have a building that is 6,000 square feet. Now, the footprint of that building is not the whole lot, but it is significantly increased from what it is under current zoning. So basically, if we have a 6,000 square foot lot, you can have a 3,000 square foot footprint now. Half the lot can be the building. Height limit is still the same. Existing city standards, which the city often says, well, we're not going to have massive buildings inside, that are going to conflict with existing buildings that aren't going to look the same. Your neighborhoods are still going to look the same, but the city's design standards do not address exterior appearance of buildings. And I'll show you some photos in a second. The units would still be subject to setback requirements, but these can be waived by administrative hearings. Now, what I just said doesn't address ADUs, which let me just cover that. The state says that you can have up to 800 square feet of these additional in-law units, and it doesn't count in the lot coverage requirement. So currently, if you had a 6,000 square foot lot and you had your 3,000 footprint from the new zoning and you add another 800 square feet, you bump up the lot coverage. I can't see my notes here, but you bump up the lot coverage. I think it's to about 63% or something. The city wants to increase the size of the accessory dwelling units, these in-law units, and allow up to 1,200 square feet. In my neighborhood, Elmhurst, a lot of houses are 1,200 square feet. So this is really doubling the amount of building footprint. So that's what would happen if the city passes the ADU ordinance. If they don't, we still have significantly more lot coverage with the proposed general plan. Now let me just see what this kind of looks like. The gray building in the upper corner is a fourplex. It covers pretty much the whole lot. There's a little bit of setback. This is an existing structure. So this is one of a few of these in my neighborhood in Elmhurst, but this is something that you could envision you could have on every lot. This is only 4 units, so it could actually be up to 6 units. The other picture on the right hand gives you more of a feeling of what a 6-unit structure might look like. This is also a building that pretty much covers the entire 5,000 square foot lot. It has a little bit of front setback. I talked about massive structures. In the bottom is a box single family house that was approved in the last few years. So when the city says, we have design standards that will, address what buildings look like, this is a building that a recently built building. So you can see again, if you look at the mass of the increase of the general plan. In the middle is a duplex. Again, you see the hardscaping in the front. So it doesn't really have a front yard. And then the final picture in the lower corner is actually from Seattle. And that's certainly 3+ building next to an existing house. So you just to give a feel for what this could look like. What's the presumed need for upzoning? The city just sent the general plan, the housing element just kind of gave its blessing to the housing element, which is a mandated state document. That document shows that the city does not need to change its zoning in order to meet its assigned housing need, which is about 45,000 units. So the city's own documentation says we don't need to do upzoning in single family zones. It's not necessary. So I just want to clarify that it's not needed for meeting the number of units, nor is it needed for meeting the number of affordable units. So if we don't need single family zoning, why, in order to meet the housing need, why do it? Well, the city is saying that it is about desegregating or integrating neighborhoods. It's saying that some of Sacramento's neighborhoods are predominantly white because of existing single family zoning, because these neighborhoods are desirable, and because they excluded people of color and lower income people because they were single family. What the city doesn't say in that is Sacramento has a diversity of neighborhoods. All of its neighborhoods, including the quote more, I would just say more expensive neighborhoods, all have a diversity of racial groups in them. And the city is saying, again, single family zoning has excluded lower income families, and that in order to change that, you need this missing middle housing, which is duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes in those neighborhoods. Again, this ignores the fact that Sacramento actually neighborhoods are diverse. There are single family neighborhoods of various economic ranges in Sacramento currently. So just kind of a reality check here. R1 zoning already has missing middle housing. R1 zoning already allows corner duplexes. There are grandfathered multifamily units inside R1 zoning. And of course, the accessory dwelling units, now the state law allows 2 of those per lot. And again, economics and preference, not race, is what determines where people live in Sacramento. And the city's proposal is not going to provide affordable housing. There's no mandate that this upzoning, that those units be affordable. And in fact, what's likely, much more likely, is that they will be market rate, probably rental, maybe some ownership units. So they will not be affordable to lower income households in any case. And really, this is a real potential boon to outside investors and absentee landlords who can come into neighborhoods and either tear down or convert existing single family housing and put in six unit apartments. Maybe they would be 6 unit condos, like most likely market rate or above market rate apartments. It also is not going to do anything about the equity between quote desirable and undesirable neighborhoods. And I think Chris will address this too. In reality, if we want to do something about equity, then all neighborhoods need to be desirable, not a couple of them in Sacramento. And that means investing in all those neighborhoods in terms of schools and streets and amenities. I just have a couple more here. So what are the impacts? As I mentioned, increased building mass and lot coverage. So basically you're reducing the open space and the lower density feeling of Sacramento's predominantly single family neighborhoods, which are not Midtown. They are lower density. Density could be increased 3 to 6-fold in these neighborhoods, which is a pretty significant change. And essentially then you eliminate the option of moderate density neighborhoods. So we move people towards the Midtown kind of density. This ignores, we know some people prefer Midtown and urban density, and that's where they live. Other people, including the people that have bought into many of Sacramento's predominantly single family neighborhoods, they actually want a lower density. It's a moderate density, really. They are quieter, there's less traffic. So this is a preference that people of all racial groups have selected and purchased when they moved into these neighborhoods. Again, the impacts, traffic, Sacramento's, many of these neighborhoods have narrow streets, will increase traffic. There are parking issues already on these streets. Many streets you can't drive 2 cars down at the same time. Garbage day, buildings, and everybody puts their garbage can out and their recycling can and the green waste can, probably not the green waste cans because they won't have green waste, but that's like 12 cans out in front of the house. And finally, the aged sewer system is really an issue which hasn't been looked at in terms of the general plan. This is quickly, all the orange lines here, these are all this is Midtown, East Sac, Land Park, Elmhurst, Tahoe Park. These are all a combined sewer system where the sewer and the drain water run in together to one line. This system has overflowed well over 100 times in the last decade. It has serious issues. It's under, under orders of the state water board, because of its age and because of its the overflow. So it really is a serious problem. And again, we're talking about going, six-fold density increase is really going to impact that system. Finally, environmental impacts. There has been the issue that, well, let's get people packed in and then we'll be able to preserve open space. Well, if you want to preserve open space, you need to do something deliberate about that. Packing people into these neighborhoods is not going to preserve open space. It will reduce backyard trees, backyard vegetation, and reduce water going to street trees. Obviously, it will reduce, by reducing vegetation, also increase urban temperatures. These are all impacts that have not been looked at in the general plan. It will increase use of density on heavily used parks, and very importantly, will increase water demand as we head into a drought. So I'm gonna, because I think I've kind of gone over time here, going to turn this over to Chris. Chris is a resident of Colonial Heights in Sacramento. He's been here since 2016. I've actually been here since 1981. Chris participates in several community organizations, including the Colonial Heights Neighborhood Association and Hope for Sacramento, which is a homeless advocacy group. He currently holds a BS in information technology and an MBA. He works as a project manager in the healthcare field. So Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I will monitor the chat for questions. And after Chris, Emily and Isaiah will speak. So go for it, Chris. Thank you.
All right, great. Can everyone hear me okay?
Mhm.
All right, great. So the city bases their argument for upzoning on three main pillars. I'll go over them pretty briefly, and then we'll talk about what the unintended consequences and impacts of those would be, and then some conclusions and maybe some alternatives to what we could do instead. So the first argument the city makes is racial equity, like Maggie said. Redlining happened in the past. I mean, we can't deny that. It was a discriminatory lending practice that, essentially wrote off entire areas of cities based on the racial and ethnic makeup of the areas. And it definitely has affected communities of color, and still does even to this day. But the argument is that changing the density regulations will allow families of color to move into some of these amenity-rich, traditionally white neighborhoods. The second thing is the demographic preferences. The argument is that because household size has been shrinking for decades, I mean, back in the 60s, it was, 3 or 4 people per household. Nowadays, it's closer to 2.5 if you average it out. And because of that smaller size, the argument is that younger home buyers prefer walkable neighborhoods and shorter commutes, even if it means that they have to live in more dense environment. And then the third, and one of the biggest reasons they bring up, is affordable housing, in the sense that California is estimated to be short somewhere between 1 million and 3.5 million homes. And the supposition is that increasing density will cause more housing construction, which will then essentially trickle down and lower the price of homes, and as well as rents. Unfortunately, a lot of those suppositions, while they sound good, they don't hold up to actual evidence and empirical study. So when it comes to racial segregation, New York University did a study based on large upzonings in New York City. And instead of increasing the diversity of the neighborhoods, it was actually associated with between a 5 and 9% decrease in the share of people of color living in those neighborhoods. In addition, there is, when it comes to affordable housing, there have been studies that show that upzoning actually increases the price of lands and rents and things like that. Yona Freemark at MIT found that over 5 years after some upzoning that happened there was an increase in the property values and the transaction prices for upzoned parcels, but there was no actual housing added. And then Daniel Kuhlman in Minneapolis, a more recent study, he found that eliminating single family housing was associated with on average, a 3 to 5% increase in land transactions. And that's actually more, it was more than that in low income communities is what he was finding. In addition, and then finally, like, home buyer preferences and demographic preferences. Redfin, the real estate website, they did a study based on the traffic on their website, and they found that 89% of home buyers would prefer a single family home with a yard over a similar in price and size unit in a triplex or a fourplex, even if it meant they had to drive further to work. So pretty much based on everything I just talked about, there are a couple effects that we can reasonably expect to come out of a move from the city to eliminate single family zoning. One would be limited construction of additional market premium housing, because and likely in lower income communities that are already slated for development. So because the housing is new, typically it's charged at a premium rate. New housing isn't typically for affordable or low income people, and chances are they're going to put it in, developers will put it in areas that were already slated for development and already a little depressed. An example with upside for property increase. An example of that would be Oak Park with the Aggie Square development. It Let's just be frank, it doesn't make sense to spend $1 million on a parcel in Curtis Park or Land Park or East Sacramento when you can get 3 in Oak Park, which will double in value in the next 10 years once Aggie Square is going. The second effect that we can expect is increased prices for existing homes due to the increase in land values, as well as a gradual reduction in single family housing stock. The people that want to live in single family homes will bid up the prices of the ones that are left over. And then the last thing we would expect to see is increased racial displacement due to an acceleration of current trends of gentrification and redevelopment. As far as what we can do instead, there's a couple of things. I mean, I know that Maggie mentioned ADUs and how there are some issues around there, but I think that with wise limits in place, we can streamline the process. Sacramento area Council of Governments, they did a study and found that the median ADU is about 600 square feet and rents for about $1,200, and 15% of those are rented to friends or family for free. So they're inherently affordable. And one of the two things the cities can do to kind of supplement that development and provide truly affordable housing would be to maintain a library of pre-approved designs that meet design standards, save some people a little money and go into architects, as well as they can provide low-cost financing paid back by the increase in property tax from the new construction. Another thing they can do is what we need to do is fix our regressive construction taxes. If you check the city building department, and I'll post a link to it in the chat after this, the taxes on a 1,000 square foot home amount to about 16.5%. But if you take that same home and blow it up to 2,500, it's a 10.2% tax. So it stands to reason that builders get more bang for their buck by building bigger houses that are more expensive, that are out of reach of lower and moderate income people. And then the third thing that the city needs to do is, like Maggie said, invest in our underserved communities. Just increasing the density doesn't really do anything to uplift anyone like out of poverty, and that's really the main issue. We need to do things to make all of our neighborhoods desirable, which will in turn take some of the demand pressure off of some of our more higher amenity neighborhoods, which will stabilize prices. So we need to have parks, trails, retail services and cafes, like things like that people enjoy living around and want to be around. And just a final thought before I turn it over. Ultimately, what we're doing with this upzoning is it's the city's attempt to appear as if they're taking action with regards to affordable housing and equity without taking any responsibility for the results. They're really just stepping back, washing their hands of the problem, and hoping developers will come in and fix it, and everything will be fine. Based on everything we just spoke about, the results of that are like eliminating single family housing is likely to have some serious negative impacts that we can't just walk back. We can't just undo them overnight. And while there's no, oh, is that me? No. While there's no simple solution for this, but it's a multifaceted problem. And we'll need to have meaningful long-term action to both build more houses and also empower those at the lower end of our economic scale to better their circumstances. Otherwise, no amount of density will solve this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I just want to encourage people again to put questions in the chat. One of the questions was whether the duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, sixplexes can be sold, being ownership rather than condos, rather than rental units. I don't know the answer to that. I don't think the city is talking about that, but I think that's something that we can get back to people about. And we may have to do that with some of the questions in the chat. So still put those questions in and we will come back. So I'm going to introduce both Emily and Isaiah, and then they can do this in the order they want. First, I really want to thank them and Livable California for taking the time to participate in this forum. And also thank you again, Chris, for your very informative presentation as usual. So Emily Gable Luddy served for 10 years on Burbank City Council as a city council member and as mayor, focusing on affordable housing issues. She has broad experience as a zoning administrator and urban designer during her 30-year career as a public servant, and she volunteers as a legislative analyst for Livable California. Isaiah Madison is an urban planner and community organizer in South Los Angeles. He chairs his local neighborhood council planning committee, educating on pending legislation and development proposals. He is also on the board of Livable California. And their focus tonight is going to be on state legislation. So I'll let you guys take it in whatever order you want. And thank you again very much for coming.
Thank you for the invitation. Since I have SB 9, it's a lower number than 10. I'll start first. Great research, by the way, and really great research, Chris, because you're beginning to scratch beneath the surface of some of the more casual pronouncements about how this densification can solve housing affordability. I'm going to focus on SB 9. And SB 9 has been cast by the President Pro Tem of the Senate, Tony Atkins, as a duplex bill. It is a reincarnation of a bill that was defeated last year, SB 1120, because the state legislature ran out of time to adopt it and it was not adopted. It has been amended, and to give you the update, it was approved today, voted out of the Senate Housing Committee today. So it will be going on to the Assembly. There are no dates yet. We expected this at Livable. We certainly thought that given the momentum and the fact that the President Pro Tem of the Senate usually gets their way, that the bill would move forward. What I'd like to do is go over its current incarnation. And it's interesting to me that the general plan for Sacramento really tracks state law. And as I go forward talking about SB 9, you'll see the obvious relationship. And then I'm going to finish by suggesting some approaches that you may want to use in talking to your council members and mayor. I wouldn't shy away from talking with them. I would certainly make appointments and talk to them about your concerns regarding the general plan and any options that you think would be more successful. First of all, we already have ADU law, and ADUs can be no smaller than 800 square feet if they're separate from a home, up to 1,200 square feet for a 2-bedroom. ADUs can also be built inside of the home up to 500 square feet. So throughout the state of California, in all 482 cities, single-family housing is now enabled triplexes, ranging from 800 to 1,200 square feet, and maybe in some cases larger. Secondly, I just want to say that in single family neighborhoods, as you know, and as Maggie pointed out in the beginning, our neighborhoods have evolved over time. We've gone through different levels of development. I noticed in the Sacramento general plan, the vision, the staff talk about how there are Victorian duplexes next to single family homes. And so people have developed regular daily relationships with one another, kids, families, elders, young people. And this kind of relationship is extensive through all communities, including in Southern California, Pico Rivera, Southgate, Bellflower, Crenshaw, Baldwin Hills, Arcadia, Monterey Park. All of these communities are very diverse and are Latino, Asian American, African American, white. They're just a huge range of people living in these neighborhoods. But what they share in common is a sort of general fabric of knowing your neighbor, knowing who's there, and having a real relationship with people, especially since we've been going through COVID. Many of these neighborhoods have stories of immigration and the dream of homeownership, and that is particularly true in the communities of South Los Angeles, and certainly the communities of Southeast Los Angeles, which have a higher immigrant population. I wanted to thank Maggie for telling me about Tony Atkins' piece today in the Sacramento Bee, because I read it, and while I agree she has a very compelling story from her childhood, some of the points she raised are not really applicable to the conversations we're having tonight. I mean, she talks about lack of trust among neighbors, and I'd say certainly we have a lack of trust about developers coming in. She talks about tired arguments, and I will tell you in SB 9, the minimum or the maximum side and rear yard setbacks mandated by the state in this bill are 4 feet. Doesn't talk about lot size, but that is the maximum setback. So if you have a lot in Sacramento, the addition of a duplex can expand out to within 4 feet of the rear and side yard. And I don't believe that is consistent with your current rules in Sacramento. So let's talk about the points of SB 9. It mandates 4 units on one lot, 1 duplex, and an ADU and a junior ADU. There is nothing in this legislation that excludes ADUs from being constructed under SB 9. If a property owner wants to split off their lot, they can do it under this law over the counter at the planning department. And as a result of that lot split, they can put a 2-unit residential development on the lot, the remnant that's split off. So that is a total of 6 units. That's why I find it fascinating how state law is tracking Sacramento law and vice versa. On parking, only 1 parking space per unit is required. And I ask you, how many families have 1 car? No parking is required if the building or buildings are within 1/2 mile of transit or buses with a frequent headway. And no parking is required if there is a car share on the block. And I have to tell you, I don't think any mom and pop, which was characterized in Tony Atkins' opinion piece today, would know that there's a car share on the block. No side or rear yards need be wider than 4 feet, regardless of lot size. If a developer cannot pencil the project with the standards required by a city, then those standards can be revised. A city standard cannot physically preclude 2 units and cannot preclude units being at least 800 square feet. And it's, to me, interesting because 800 square feet is one of the precise sizes of an ADU. So we've already got this worked out. The minimum lot size in SB 9 is 1,200 square feet. So those are sort of the fundamental issues with SB 9. What it does is what Chris was talking about, and that is it increases the density of property to a new standard of higher and best use. And higher and best use is the gold standard for determining parcel value. So the effect of this bill will be to increase the land value and therefore increase the cost of housing. There is a provision in here that says that a city can require owner occupancy for the first year after an applicant receives the lot split. So if you have a home on part of the lot and you're going to split your lot, then I guess what that means is you can live another year on the larger lot and then sell it and move out. But if you have a vacant lot and you decide to split it in two, I have no idea what you're going to do. Maybe you pitch a tent. Some things I'd like you to think about is that there is no economic study of the effects of this proposal. There has only been market promotion and arguments. There's been no deeper evaluation of how a homeowner themselves will split a lot, finance the construction, secure a long-term loan, construct a duplex on their own property, and also on the remnant lot that they split off. While it's billed as a mom and pop solution, ask yourself, do I have the wherewithal to take a construction loan, arrange long-term financing, go through plan check, understand what the requirements are for building, and build? And I submit that most mom and pops do not have the wherewithal to do that. So when we talk about who will ultimately own these units, I would suggest that it's more attractive to investors than it is to a homeowner. And I think at this point, I'll make a couple of closing comments about approaching your council members. First of all, I served on the council for 10 years. So if you call in and you state your piece, or you get together with 4 or 5 of you and you call in one night and talk about all of your concerns and do it more than once, I think it will raise the profile of the efforts that you are undertaking to make the council aware that there are certainly different voices that need to be heard in this conversation. And it's appreciated. Secondly, I would insist that there be a real estate finance and development study of the ultimate effect of this. I think Chris is right. I think that without understanding the dynamics of investment, that there is a real high probability that it will not accomplish what it's intended to accomplish. And I hate to say it's lip service, but it sounds like it would not be so effective. The other thing I would say is that when we're talking about all of these new units, the unit size is decreased. So who is it serving? Is it really serving family housing? And is it really serving families whose primary earners drive to work? They don't have transit. Maybe their job doesn't give them the luxury of going from their home to their work. And that there are a lot of people in that circumstance who are not, don't have the luxury of working from home. Call into council, even if it's 30 seconds. State your concerns. It's always good to start early in stating your concerns. And I think at this point, I will stop and turn it over to Isaiah. Isaiah, it's all yours.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to be reviewing SB 10 and then just giving some background about the neighborhood I live in and the issues we have generally with this upzone density, pro market growth movement. First, SB 10 is another bill that's in the legislature this session. Last year it was SB 902, I want to believe. It was a Wiener bill like it is this year. And it is a bill that allows city councils to easily upzone any parcel to accommodate 10 units by right. It does this by eliminating the need for environmental review and avoiding any potential CEQA lawsuits. There is absolutely no affordable housing included in this proposal. So these 10 units would just be market rate housing. It's purely Reaganomics. And one of the things that we're concerned about is that it could lead to corruption of city councils, especially smaller city councils that can be more easily bought by pro-development groups. And you can use this tool in any urban infill site, which is virtually anywhere in any city in California, any exurban area, urban area, suburban area. That definition of urban infill site is almost everything except agricultural and preserved land. There's also a jobs-rich clause in SB 10 that allows HCD to create a map of jobs-rich areas within California where this tool would be able to be used. And that just opens it up to politics, even partisan politics, because the governor is a partisan position. We just feel like that could be used to target people who are dissenting against this approach. Let's see, transit-rich area. This tool is also very useful in transit-rich areas, which in Los Angeles, where I live, is virtually everywhere. Our whole city is inundated with transit, which is ironic because a lot of people cannot get to where they're going via transit yet. Unfortunately, it's not a useful tool. Most people, this transit-rich area can be just one bus, and most people can't get to where they're going on one bus, like one bus line that goes, from A to B. We have to transfer. I do take transit, unlike many people in Los Angeles. And today I was on the train going to where I was going for an hour and a half. So, that's something that I have the luxury of doing right now. But most people, if they're working and, if they're raising kids, if there are a number of reasons why people cannot spend hours and hours of the day on transit. So it's just not really a realistic thing to do. And I would ultimately say that this tool is another tool that Sacramento will use to force density into municipalities. It's being advertised as a local control tool, but they're putting this jobs rich clause in, they're really loading the arena, and they're doing a lot of things that make it almost like, I would say, a gun to shoot yourself with, because they're forcing you to build, and now they're giving you the tool to upzone all your houses and your low density areas to allow missing middle housing, or whatever they want to call it, unaffordable market rate housing, basically. So that's SB 10 in a nutshell. I believe the next hearing it has is in governance and finance next week. And last year, its equivalent was killed in the assembly in appropriation. So it's one of the bills that labor has a problem with, because they don't have the required working pay provisions in it. So if you have any connections in labor, make sure you plug them with this bill and ask them how they feel, and ask them to contact their legislator. All right, so next I will talk about Just My Neighborhood and this movement. Just a kind of a lot of the points Chris brought up and spoke about, but I think the main problem with this ideology of upzone and trying to defeat inequity with upzoning expensive areas is just flawed. The reality is that we need to make neighborhoods that are suffering and undesirable nicer. we need to bring services to people who need them. You know, it's not, we want to make the schools better in South LA. We don't want to send South LA kids to Santa Monica schools. You know, we want communities where Black people can be a majority in the community and still have opportunity to, you know, get a decent education and go to a good college, or, you know, walk down the street and not be harmed, and have good stores. And, you know, so I think that it's really taking a backward approach to it. Um, let's see, you know, in my neighborhood, I live in Crenshaw in South Los Angeles. We're the Blackest neighborhood in Los Angeles. I would say we're the Black heart of California, the Black seat of political power. You know, we have a very strong anti-market rate growth coalition going on in our neighborhoods. And, you know, we do have people who have been working on this issue for decades, and their goal is to try to get money from the government to pay for housing for people who have been, you know, left behind from the economy for decades. You know, there are people here who have been through the '92 riots, who have been through, you know, so the crack epidemic, the AIDS epidemic. You know, there are people who have been suffering forever. And, you know, to think that we're going to go and upzone their house and that will solve their problems is a joke. You know, that's actually, I would say, borderline racist in my personal opinion. And I don't like to use that word. I think it gets abused today, but it's just not the right way to solve poverty. So, you know, this movement is organized around transit, and you know, we know people who take transit often don't have a better option because it's not necessarily a useful way to get around. So we think that this type of mentality in incentivizing development by transit, by reducing the cost of development, by reducing parking requirements, by increasing upzoning by transit is, you know, is predatory in its nature. It targets people who, you know, maybe can't move, or, you know, just don't have another way to get around. So we just think that's not a great pairing. Let's see, what other points do I have? Oh, the market. So, you know, all this stuff is about market, I would say market socialism, and, you know, and supercharging the market to meet demand. But the reality is that there are people here in our community that the market will never help. So we really need to find ways to help them without the market. And we're really hoping this new administration will help us with a lot of money to help those people. Let's see, I have 2 more points. Okay, person-based investment. You know, we need person-based investment so that people can, you know, go to school and not take on a lot of debt, and start businesses and learn how to be self-sufficient in our community. You know, we don't need expensive housing. And last point is, I mean, just the whole premise for me personally is that, like, I would develop my house. So the neighborhood I live in right now, the houses are about $1 million. That I would develop my house, sell it, you know, sell it for 4 houses, which would probably be the same cost, $1 million each, to a likely, you know, not as Black group of people that are living around me, and call it a solution to gentrification is literally laughable. I would not be able to do that in my community. Like, I would feel ashamed because people would be so upset that I would destroy the community and sell it to non-Black people. That's just how the community I live in works. You know, we're really focused on trying to help poor Black people. And I know we can't do that in the state because we have things like the affirmative action ban, and we have a ban on public housing, right? And we have a stagnant property tax system, but that is what people in my neighborhood are trying to do. And that is what a true, you know, progressive system works like. It's not this market socialism that's coming out of San Francisco. And, it needs to stop because we can't do that here. So it will stop. That will not happen here. So I just, when I first got involved in this stuff, it was just very stressful because there are two different narratives going on about what is and what is not progressive. And this YIMBY stuff, this high density housing stuff, this is not progressive. That's all.
Thank you so much. We have a couple questions in the chat, but I just wanted to ask Emily and Isaiah, since you guys have been monitoring the state stuff and since, it parallels Sacramento so well, where is this coming from? I mean, I was disappointed. I spoke at an environmental group the other night, and I think people haven't really thought through, certainly not what you were just talking about, Isaiah. And, the bill that you're talking about, Emily, I mean, I think, we can end up with 0 lot lines. And so then you're converting all these neighborhoods to look like San Francisco or Manhattan, although planners are now denying that. But I mean, this densification and, these other, we've heard some of the impacts, but where is this coming from to do this? Who's behind this?
I think that development interests and big tech are behind the push. And I have followed this probably for 3 or 4 years now as mayor and a council member. And big tech was having a terrible time with employees who had to drive miles in to the office, and they pretty much dominate the Northern California economy. And so, as far as I know, the YIMBY movement began with a woman in San Francisco who's actually a libertarian. And fine, I mean, I got nothing against that, that's fine. But I find that the continuing drivers of this are big technology, Facebook, Uber, Airbnb, all of the large corporations that have evolved over the last 7 to 10 years. And instead of dealing with the housing themselves in some way, putting it on their campuses, making it part of their framework, they socialized this cost out and had a tremendous impact on young and ambitious politicians like Scott Wiener, who wants to replace Nancy Pelosi. And that's my take on how this got started. Because as both Isaiah and Chris say, and I will say, if you scratch beneath the surface, there are no metrics for this. There's no real look at the economics of it. It's more a market promotion. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, I mean, I would also add to that this isn't, I mean, this is really just building off of Emily's comment, but what we have is a wage problem. In my neighborhood in LA, to our discontent, we are zoned for a lot of housing already, regardless of these bills. But none of the housing is getting built because the developers can't pull the permits because people aren't making the wages that the developers need them to make to pay the rents. And it's ridiculous that tech is doing this, when, Facebook is putting like, in one of these new towers they built in San Francisco, Facebook's putting like 10,000 jobs. Facebook knows how much it costs to house people in San Francisco. So, maybe they should put their jobs elsewhere where it's less expensive, or they should just pay their workers more so that more housing could get built. But it's really not a zoning issue. It's a wage issue.
So I just lost the chat. I don't know, Chris, do you have any thoughts on that? Or I was going to go to the chat for questions. I can't hear you. Can't hear you.
How's that?
Yeah.
All right, great. So I would say, yeah, I'd say Emily and Isaiah covered it really well. There really aren't any metrics for success here. It's just kind of pie in the sky thinking without any real research behind it. And like Isaiah said, it's a poverty issue, not a zoning issue.
So three questions that came up in the chat were, how will this affect schools? One question was about the environmental impact report. And I think Emily did allude to that. I do believe they will have to do an EIR on this. The exact timing of that, I don't know if they're doing that concurrently. So that's something that we need to look into and see what the status of the environmental impact report, because there are very serious environmental impacts that I don't want to minimize the sewer thing. It's a huge thing here in Sacramento. The capacity does not exist. And of course, the drought is another looming environmental impact. But I will find out about that. Another question, so the schools, and then another question, which now has come up a couple of times here, is Airbnb. So are we, financing people's little, boutique hotels in the middle of neighborhoods by doing this? So does somebody want to take on the school or the Airbnb question?
I'll talk about schools first. I would make the argument that, I mean, let's just be frank. The Sacramento school district is a mess. I mean, it is what it is. We all know it. There's not really anything we can say here to convince anyone that it's not a mess. Some schools are okay, but I would assume that if we double or potentially triple the density and the number of students attending a school system that is already like in a deep budget hole, then it would essentially only get worse, would be my expectation.
Airbnb, somebody want to address that?
Sure, I'll say a couple words and I'll pass it off to Isaiah. We have about 500 Airbnbs in the city of Burbank. We don't permit them. So it's a good example of how it can't be enforced. And while SB 9 talks about you can't rent for less than 30 days, that's what our zoning code says with respect to ADUs or even homes. But you can see by the number we have in the city of Burbank, there's no way of enforcing that. We have a peculiar problem in Southern California because the 2028 Olympics are coming to Los Angeles. So my sense is one of the things we face is a lot of short-term rentals because of that. So that's my take on Airbnb. It's not enforceable. And I'm not sure what we're going to do locally.
Isaiah, do you have any comment on schools or the Airbnb issue? No, I'll go to another question.
It's just more competition, right? It's just more. It's in a way I can compare it to upzoning is that it raises the value of property. So now people can use a house as a hotel, and when it should be going to somebody who needs it instead. And I think San Diego, I've been following the various politics around the state, and I think that's really Airbnb is one of the targets that people in San Diego are really trying to hone in. They're recalling one of their YIMBY council person who just took the president of the city council, Jen Campbell. But I totally agree that's a problem.
And every Airbnb that's up takes away a housing unit for someone.
Right. So one of the things that's this is in the chat too, that we've kind of broached a little bit here in Sacramento is, people's ability to vote on this, because it really is such a drastic change. And so I'm kind of interested in, Emily and Isaiah, has that come up in other jurisdictions? What's your take on that? So basically being on the ballot.
I know our city council, some people on our city council have in Los Angeles have spoken about putting the housing element update on the ballot because it might be kind of contentious. We don't have a general plan in Los Angeles. Well, we do, but we have community plans that are more relevant. So our community plan in the west part of South LA, which is where I live, just recently got updated. But yes, people are considering it here.
We probably aren't considering it locally at our city. Our city's much smaller. It's 106,000 people. I don't know that the city would have, the residents would have an appetite to vote on something like that. There was a bill passed a couple of years ago, which does not allow cities to downzone by initiative. But I don't think it prohibits cities from saying, we want to hold the line. And Isaiah, maybe you can expand on that. I think it was SB 330.
Yeah, I'm not sure how SB 330 works with things that are upcoming, like a general plan amendment. I know it definitely prevents from downzoning, but I think that's mostly stuff that was existing when the law was passed. But you'd have to look into it more. I'm not sure.
Another question that and I know Chris has looked at this, but you know, we've got cities like Portland and, you know, Minneapolis who have passed this upzoning, and I guess there's, you know, some and maybe even Seattle, you know, is the jury's still kind of out in some of those. I know we've looked for research, but Emily or Isaiah, are you guys aware of impacts of this kind of thing in other areas where it has been done?
Yes, I have been watching this sweep through the northern cities, which is honestly why I'm a little scared for y'all in Sacramento. And you know what I see it as is, especially like Portland and Minneapolis, are cities that don't have very many people of color, and cities that definitely don't have middle class people of color. The reason why these policies have really fallen flat in Los Angeles is because we have a very large relative to, you know, what can exist, a very large middle class Black population. So we associate home ownership with Black people, as well as all the other many minority groups and immigrant groups that have neighborhoods and enclaves in Los Angeles. So I really see it as a type of northern progressive mentality.
Yeah, interesting. I spoke today with a planning commission member from Minneapolis because we wanted to get an update on how things are going. And her comments, she's an architect, her comments were, there are no metrics on the triplex zoning. She is unable to get the data from the city planners about what's been built and how it's been put to beneficial use. Has it fulfilled its intended purpose? She also pointed out that from her perspective, if there are, and it's triplexes, it's not fourplexes, that the city of Minneapolis spent more money on market promotion of the fourplex than they did on any study of the economic development or the economic results of the change of policy. And then finally, she gave an anecdote of, it would be her expectation because of the cost to build, that construction of new triplexes would happen in the rich communities, but in the poor minority communities, the Black communities, and the mixed communities where she lives, it would be more likely that someone would come in and take a home and cut it into 3 to achieve the triplex. And then she asks the question, who does that serve? It doesn't serve families. In fact, you take a home and you subdivide it, it gets a lot smaller. So we're going to continue the conversation in a couple of weeks. But that was from one of the planning board members in Minneapolis.
Thank you. I did want, and Patricia, maybe you can just unmute Will. Will is our co-host, to see if you had any comments, Will. Patricia, can you unmute? There you go.
I'm good.
Okay. Will is
Thanks.
with East Sacramento Preservation, the co-host of this forum.
Thank you, Maggie, and thank you, Chris and Emily and Isaiah. Very good presentation. I really feel that we have our work ahead of us. You know, and it is a matter of being persistently vocal. And I think we've got the ammunition that we need to go forward. It's just a matter of getting access and showing up and hitting at the council. And like Emily said, keep calling in if that's what it takes. But besides that, I mean, I think that we need to do, in this day of Zoom, you know, convenient Zoom meetings with the council member in their free time. That was a pun, I mean, I guess. So.
I am just putting in the chat the Save Sacramento Neighborhoods emails, and would really encourage people on this call to get in touch with us. I think there's a lot of questions that have been raised, and I did want to just and let's, if anybody's got any last questions, please put those in the chat. Somebody did ask about the down zoning law, and I guess that is a little scary there, Isaiah. If this passes, then are we stuck with it?
That is what I think maybe we have to do a little more research to find out. I think it's mostly what was in place when it happened. But you know, there have been so many laws passed that you literally have to go through a gamut of laws to figure out the answer to every question. It's terrible.
So I don't think we've got any more questions. And I'm sure people will think of questions. And again, I misspelled our email here. It's .com, not .com, but and I don't know, I guess we can, I'll be happy to pass on questions to Isaiah and to Emily as well. I don't know if you guys want to put your emails in the chat, but why don't we just have one more go around with the speakers, kind of last comments. And again, I really appreciate that all of you took the time, and all the people who've come to this have taken the time. And I think it is really critical for me as a, affordable housing advocate. I don't think it's going to do affordable housing. I'm also an environmentalist. I think it's just going to create a density, an unlivable density in parts of Sacramento, which is completely unnecessary. But let's just have, why don't we start with you, Chris? Do you have any kind of last parting comments?
Sure. I would say that it's really important that our council members and our mayor and our city bureaucracy listen to the voices of the people who actually live in this city and have to deal with the plans and mistakes that they make, especially when it comes to land use and things that affect the economy so deeply and so thoroughly. Mistakes are costly and can't be taken back. So it makes sense to move cautiously and with evidence in hand. I'm not sold with a bunch of pie in the sky thinking, where we throw up our hands and we hope for the best. And I think that we as Sacramentans deserve better from our city council than that.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, Emily or Isaiah, which one of you guys wants to go next?
Well, I would say in approaching council members, it would be really good to formulate some clear questions that cannot be answered yes or no, that require them, even if they are uncomfortable responding, you will plant a seed in their mind about, well, maybe we should do a real estate finance and development analysis of what this will be, or maybe as Chris was and Isaiah say, this does not foreclose gentrification. So asking open-ended questions to those council members is really a good way, if anything, to get them thinking about what they're missing. They owe it to y'all. You know, you're in their districts. They owe you answers. And for anyone to say, well, it's the right thing to do, that's not an answer. That's sort of sweeping the consequences under the rug. So formulate some good questions that cannot be answered yes or no, and don't let them off the hook.
I'm sorry to
Maybe-
laugh at that, but that's exactly what Jay Chenier said to me when I asked him, like, why would we do this?
I just, before you go, Isaiah, there was a thing that popped up in the chat, and I just, it says we set the tone that minorities are low income, which is not true. All minorities are low income, which is not true. I'm not sure we said that. Why don't any of you ever mention low income white people as a minority? I'm offended by your assumptions. So let's just address that. You don't have to address it, Isaiah, but okay, go for it.
I mean, hey, I can totally relate to that sentiment. Being, you know, I won't spend too much time on this, but being a minority who I didn't grow up here. I grew up in Redondo Beach, and it was, you know, primarily white people, upper middle class white people, and so it was. I always had a chip on my shoulder about the rhetoric that I was hearing. Around minorities and low-income people, the political rhetoric. But then I moved to this area, to South LA, and I started talking to people. And you know, when I lived there, I if I still lived there, I would have thought the rhetoric that we're hearing now about equity and upzoning and all this stuff was genuine rhetoric from people here, because I just didn't know the difference. But the reality is, here people are trying to help low-income people, because in any neighborhood you try to help low-income people, and it's mostly people of color, because I live in South LA. So it, you know, it's just something that you personally have to get over and include, because, you know, the market capitalism helps minority people less. There are just less opportunities to minority people. They're farther away from the purse, because white people have more money than brown people in this country. You know, they have more access to resources, to schools. They have higher enrollments in elite colleges. You know, they have higher paying salaries at good companies. So it's really an inequity thing that you know, we have to talk about when we're talking about these issues. So, and there's just so much history that has happened that has put people in this place, in this racial divide. So it's just really necessary to talk about it. But I totally can empathize with that comment, because, you know, at what point it did bother me too. But for what I would say about Sacramento is just organize, you know, drop off flyers at your neighbors' houses if you have to. Most people who live in a single family home don't even know this could happen. You know, it's just you go and buy a house because that's what, you know, American society tells you you're supposed to do, you know, to you know, secure a nice standing under you and your family, you know, to find some stability. That's what's so like stressful to me personally about this movement. It's like, so even if you get a house, you guys still have to worry about all these problems that you worked so hard to try to get away from. You know, like concentrated poverty, or like just being able to park in front of your house. And it's just like, what? So I would just do a lot of outreach.
Again, I want to thank everybody, and I'm glad you ended on that note, Isaiah, and thank you for addressing that question. And clearly poverty is across the spectrum, and I completely appreciate what you're saying. So I'm glad you brought that perspective. I think we do have more people have gotten involved, and actually taking a page out of the book that you just mentioned here, we had some people in East Sac who've been handing out flyers and putting up flyers. And, you know, we're coming out of COVID, so I think we can have a little more contact. And I think it really is, you're absolutely right. People don't understand this, and they've been, you know, they've heard this rhetoric, and you've been told if you challenge it, that you're, you know, you're a whatever, you're a NIMBY or you're a racist. I mean, that's what Tony's article says. It's all name calling. So anyway, I would just encourage, and I'm going to call on you, Will, sorry. People, please get involved, talk to people. We've got signs you can put up. And I think we hear a perspective here tonight very clearly that it's not just Sacramento. So we're also going to have to be talking to our state legislators as well, because what's going on in Sacramento, in the Capitol, could eclipse what we're doing. Will, go ahead.
Just on a final note, I just want to say thank you for everyone being on the Zoom. I noticed here we actually have at least 50 people on this Zoom. And I want to encourage each of you that are on this Zoom to think about, you know, how can you be like a small seed of a network? We need to reach out to our neighbors, to the street that you live on, to get the information out and to be active about this. And please don't leave it up to just a few of us who get burned out on many different issues. It has to be, this is huge. This is a huge issue. It's not well thought out. I mean, I think it's a land grab by the developers and the city and the tax that it'll bring to the city. We have to preserve our neighborhoods. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. And I do see a couple questions in the chat, a couple things we have going on. We do have a petition. It's on the No to Rezone website. We also have lawn signs, and the more of those that we can get out, the more people get educated. So please check both those things out. And we are going to be following up with our electeds. And I think on a somewhat maybe hopeful note is we have seen some of them express some concerns. So I think there's a little bit of crack in that sort of unanimity that they had in January. So that's a hopeful sign. Again, thank you, Emily and Isaiah, so much for taking the time, and very jealous of that kind of beach scene behind you, Isaiah, but that's okay. The palm trees. Anyway, thank you again, everybody. Thank you, Chris, Will, all the people who attended, and please follow up with us. The email's on here. We will post a recording of this. So thank you again, everybody.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Good night.